So first of all, I want to touch on the translation of study-specific documents, which really is applicable in some hubs. Documents will need to be translated into French and Spanish. For example, the participant information sheet, the consent form, and the interview and focus group topic guides. And what I can say on that is to follow the usual procedure that you do in your hub for translations. And if you've got any questions regarding this, to check with your hub manager, because that might be different depending on the hub. I want to move into the section on tips and tricks, some skills, practical skills for conducting qualitative interviews and focus groups. So you can see there in bold and capital letters, preparation. Preparation is everything. So that you know all your documents, you know about the projects, so you can answer any questions that participants may have. So familiarize yourself with the consent procedure before you do the interview. And then during the interview, of course, you have to then make sure that the consent forms are signed, and also be very familiar with the interview and focus group topic guides. And it's important that you always keep in mind what the overall study aims are. So that's kind of guiding the interview. And, we will talk a little bit more about how you can use follow-up questions to adapt the interview to the local context, or, to each participant, depending on what they identify as areas of importance. Next, very important, I love this part, is called building rapport, or you can call it setting the scene. So especially, when you meet in person, but even online, of course, if you do interviews online, it's kind of slightly different dynamics. But if you meet in person, you introduce each other to introduce yourselves. You could, have a cup of tea or coffee or water, depending on the context and how hot it is, I guess, in the country. If it's here in the UK, it's probably tea or coffee. In other places, it might be a cold drink like water or a soft drink. Some small talk, basically, so that you get to know each other, but also it's got the purpose of putting the participant at ease so that they feel comfortable to share their personal views with you. And in terms of the preparation, I mentioned there, have a practice run through the interview guide with a colleague or a friend. So you can get used to how to ask the questions. And the skill of the qualitative researcher is key in collecting high quality qualitative data. And don't get scared or nervous. This is a learned skill. So the more you practice it, the easier it becomes. So if you've never done it before, don't expect to be an expert immediately, but kind of keep practicing, keep working at it, kind of gather tips and tricks as you go, and look for advice from some people who have done it before, and you will get better in no time. And, like I mentioned, building trust and rapport with participants so they feel comfortable to share their personal views and experiences. And it's quite a multitasking job. So we have to actively listen to participants using prompts, follow-up questions, and picking up on kind of important things they say. And also taking notes and keeping an eye on the recorder, which we will come to in a minute. So have a good grasp of the subject matter. So say, for example, if it's emus, familiarize yourself with the sensors, how the sensors work, especially if it's the usability session, you have a look at everything, how to pair it, how to switch them on, and so on. Take notes and attentively listen to the participant, and make sure they have signed the consent form, so you follow all the correct procedure that we can actually use the data afterwards, so that we have got their consent. And also it's called, you might have seen, it's called informed consent. So you give them an opportunity to answer any questions, and hopefully you can address those questions because you have gone through all the steps of being prepared and knowing about the study. Right. So it's all about finding a balance between getting participants into a flow of talking or a flow of narrating their experiences, sharing their views, while at the same time not losing focus. So covering the questions in the topic guide, but also giving them some way of, kind of getting into that flow of sharing their views. So in focus groups, which have a different dynamic than a one-to-one interview, because there are more participants, to kind of keep an eye on all the participants and encourage everybody to participate, which sometimes it could be different level of seniority. So maybe somebody who's less senior might be a bit more quiet and not feel as free to share their views. So kind of make sure that you set the ground rules when you start the focus group, so that everybody feels encouraged to participate. And then as the interview goes on, you can kind of still, ask people to say, oh, I would like to hear from you as well, kind of gently. Don't put them too much on the spot, but, try to encourage them. Keep an eye on time. Yeah, everybody is busy. Make sure you respect their time. Say, if you said you're needing 1 hour, stick to the 1 hour, if at all possible. I mean, if you have to go over, you could ask beforehand if they are fine for another 5 minutes or so. It's also good practice to give participants a heads up during the interview. So you could say, we are now about halfway through the interview, so that they know and they can follow along. And what I always say when it comes to closing the interview, always check if participants have any questions or anything else they would like to say. You wouldn't believe, you have asked all your questions, but sometimes you get to this point and you ask the participants if they've got anything else, and then they can come up with something that you have totally not thought about before. So it could be something really important. So it's good to ask them before you close the interview if there's anything else. So in focus group facilitation, I wanted to mention that, especially if you start, but there's also a lot to do. So it's good to do it in teams of 2 or even 3, especially when conducting the usability test. So we did a usability focus group in Edinburgh last week, and we were 3 people because, we had one colleague who demonstrated the technology and the sensors, and we had one overall lead, and we had another person to take notes and to keep an eye on recording the session. So there's so much to think about. So I would definitely recommend that you are at least 2 people for a focus group. And for an interview, usually you're by yourself. But I think if you're starting, you could also ask somebody to kind of support you. Like I mentioned, with the interview and focus group topic guides, make sure you keep the overall aim and the key questions. And then in follow-up questions and in probing, you can adapt to the context or the differences between participants. One more thing to mention here is that you can stop interviews or focus groups when you reach data saturation. So we have got an aim, what we want to achieve in terms of the numbers, but when you find at a point where you're not getting any new data coming out from the interviews, it's a concept called data saturation, then you can consider whether you should stop doing the interviews and focus groups. Though we don't have a huge number, so I'm not sure this will happen before we reach our target number. The next bit I want to go over is recording the interviews and focus groups. So it is important to record all interviews and focus groups for later analysis. And what we have to be making sure is that the device we use for recording the interviews and focus groups is encrypted. So each hub has got an encrypted audio recorder, the Olympus TS9500. There are other options as well to use an encrypted recording device, such as an iPhone. But every hub should have at least the one encrypted audio recorder. So for the encrypted audio recorder, you need to download and install a software which is called the ODMS R7. And within the pack, there is like a green license ID paper which has the license code on, and that is needed to activate the software. So there are some video links that you can access in the slides. We will circulate these after the training. Getting started with using the recorder, and also it's very important that you actually set up the encryption feature before recording any interviews or focus groups. So there's a video on how to do this. I can answer questions as well, but I would say, first of all, have a look at that. That is, once you have the software downloaded, it's relatively straightforward. And then again, practically have a trial run with the audio recorder, try out and see if it works. Make sure it's fully charged. and that is switched on. Even if you started not switched on, it's of no use. So make sure with all the things you have to remember that your recorder is switched on at the start of the interview or focus groups. And then as soon as possible after you've collected the data, depending if you have the one or maybe you have two in a day, upload your audio recordings to a password protected computer, so that basically you have a backup, even if it's encrypted on the on the little, audio recorder. If you lose the recorder, you lose your recording. So make sure you upload it so that you have a backup. Finally, I want to have a look at the timetable for year 2. And we are currently in year 2, so it's running from February 2024 until January 2025. And I have kind of I give you an outline, of the various things we need to do, though it can be broken down into more detailed bits of work, but I think this is kind of good as an overview. So within this year 2, we are trying to complete EMU stage 1 and 2 and CAMEL stage 1 and 2. So you can see data collection can start really for both phases 1 as soon as you've got local ethics approvals in place. And then with a little bit later, you can start with analysis. You don't have to complete all the data collection first before you can start with analysis. So it can kind of go on a little bit in parallel. Of course, you need to start with the data collection, but then you can kind of get started with the analysis as well. And then stages 2 can start. So with CAMEL stage 2, the aim is to complete that by October, I think, end of October, right, Katie? Correct me if I'm wrong, because then we've got CAMEL stage 3 coming up as well. Whereas with EMU stage 2, we've got a little bit more time to complete it by the end of this year for the project, which is January 2025. I want to show you some questions that we currently have in the CAMEL topic guides, just to give you a little bit of an idea of what I mean when I said adapting the topic guides. So this is some of the questions. We don't have the time to go through all the questions, right? So at the moment, we've got one topic guide. So this is for the interviews. And you have seen that we are using interviews both in stage 1 and stage 2. So we need to adapt it to the stage of the project as well as the local challenge, the local context and the local challenges. So say for the baseline mapping, you could start with, could you tell me what laparoscopic or surgical training looks like in your setting at the moment? And then, so then you can talk about, say, expectations of the innovation, whereas, say when it's stage 2, you can specifically ask about their experiences of it, challenges, difficulties that they actually experience with it. And also when you adapt it to the local context, some questions might not be exactly appropriate, so you feel free to kind of tailor them a little bit. So for example, locally there could be challenges relating to logistics or internet connectivity, power supply. So, feel free to explore those more, as they come up and as you prepare for the interviews and focus groups in the local context. Hopefully that has given you a little bit more of an idea of the topic guides, but we can discuss it more now. There's time to have questions and discussions just now.